Okay, so welcome everybody for this kind of like second webinar already this year on government financing. What we discussed often in this region, there's very, very good news because the number of country offices working on government financing is increasing. And as well, last year it was 3% of our total delivery, and this year or in 2018 and 2019 was 5%. So we see a growth in government financing, but then we are working in a global organization. And it's great that we have 170 country offices around the world. And today we have Brazil visiting. And Brazil doesn't have 5% of government financing, but I think like 65%. And so I would really have this kind of like, learning from other country offices to see how they have kind of like introduced the concept of government financing, where are they now, and what can we learn from other experiences which we might replicate in our region. And so really working as a global network, learning from each other. It's really funny how we got into contact. 19 years ago, I worked in the UNDP Honduras in Latin America, and I worked together with the now current RES rep from Brazil, Katina. So it was really nice that she immediately got into contact. And we're really happy that we have very committed people working in the UNDP, that people which are going on holiday, coming to Thailand to dive, want to take a one-day diving into the Bangkok regional hub. So welcome, Juliana, and thanks so much for kind of like taking a day of your holiday spending with us. A bit of history for this year, what we did. We got a new director. So Kani is the new director of Asia Pacific, and she did calls with all the country offices. And specifically, I think in East Timor and the Philippines, she said, it's great that you're doing government financing, but try to learn more from Brazil and from Uruguay. And that was, the ball started rolling. We had a deputy boot camp, so all the deputies were here. And I think we really made progress. And normally we had some pushback, like, oh, that doesn't work in my country, but all the deputies were fairly positive. Like, yeah, we should try this. Then we did a webinar. We did a webinar more like a question and answer session with all the country offices. We had all country office business plan discussions, like a 1-hour discussion between the hub and the country office, and a lot of like times government financing was mentioned. And so today, kind of like, the experiences from another country office, and then I think a short presentation from Juliana, and then especially like a question and answer. So what can we learn from the experience in Brazil, and how can we put that into action in this region? So over to you, Juliana.
Thank you very much, Patrick. It's an honor to be here. I work in UNDP Brazil since 2011. Before, I was with the World Bank, also in Brazil. So I also have IFI experience. And it's very interesting to be here, and it's an honor to be here. I would like to share our experience and see if you can find some common ground with us. I know the context here is different, but I believe lots of things that we've done, it's possible to do here in Asia and Pacific region too. So let's start. First, I wanted to show the pie of our funding. As you can see, government cost sharing is the major part of our funding. Government is major donor in Brazil. So, and government, by government, I mean federal government, I mean ministries, agencies, judiciary power, state governments, municipal governments, it's all kinds of governments, okay? So Brazil is a federal country, and as a federal country, states have a lot of political power, and they have their own budget. So we have about 15 states in Brazil from out of 26 working with UNDP. So it's also an important partner, the state government, the decentralized government in Brazil. We also have an increasing portfolio of private sector. And by private sector, I mean, for example, Petrobras, which is a giant state oil company in Brazil. So some private sector is also government, you know, amongst our partners. Another partner is Itaipu Binacional, which is a state-owned electricity company. And both of these companies are working to localize SDGs in Brazil, where they are located in the municipalities where they are located. Okay, so this is something important. we have a multiplicity of partners that we can call government, okay? Here is to show you our delivery. Brazil is, it's considered a large country office, a policy country office, what we call, which are offices that have a delivery of more than $50 million. So the good thing about working with government in Brazil, in my opinion, is that the government is the major formulator of institutions, right? And our mandate is institutional strengthening. So the government is the center of making laws, of making rules, of making codes. So it's natural for us to work with them. And what I really like to work with them is that we build projects together. We are not coming from top down to tell the government what they should be doing or tell the government what a donor wants him to do. But the government officers come to us, they demand us. And that brings a lot of add value to projects because they put their commitment, their time, their work, their sweat into projects. Projects are built together, they are written together, they are discussed, we have workshops. And this builds commitment, this builds legitimacy to what we do, to the work that is built. So there is more buy-in from our counterparts because it's taxpayers' money, it's the government money. And this government is very cherished, is very rewarded. So it's very rewarding for us when we can sign a project because it means that we built trust, we built a real connection with our partners. So this is very rewarding for Brazil. And for us, cooperation means basically convergence, means common grounds. It's not doing everything the government wants, no. We have a voice, we also hear a lot. So this exchange is what we can find a minimum ground, a common ground. Okay, so it's very important to hear government, private sector, social society. Most of our projects are done through a series of workshops, of talking to key players, of being cautious, of course. We have to be cautious with what we take in and what we take out from these meetings. But it's very important to have this exchange. And also we felt in the past years that it's very important to build a narrative, to consolidate a narrative. So we have to ask ourselves, why is UNDP in this country? What is UNDP building here? What is your history? And the issue is that government finance is natural course of history in the countries because we are working to develop countries. And as these countries are developing, as these countries are becoming richer, as these countries are becoming less unequal, they naturally and inevitably will upgrade. They will become middle income. They will become, so it's a natural course for development institutions to work with government financing. And this means, so we have to build this story. We have to build and take stock of what we've done, what we've contributed, how the country evolved, how the country improved. And this comes naturally to our counterparts, you know? So we have to take time and put in resources to tell this story. And also I believe that given that it's inevitable, we have to embrace change. We have to prepare for change. We have to make change happen, not, you know, expect for change. We need to have the best instruments to make change and to make this happen. So basically here, I would say, never put all eggs in one basket. we have to diversify. And this diversify means work with various ministries, various diversification also has lots of challenges. And the challenges are, of course, making this change. Change takes time. Change is individual, happens in individual level, happens in the organizational level, in the institutional level. So it will take time to make change. And we'll have to get out of the comfort zone. Most of the time we'll have to, get up of the chair and visit our partners. And in Brazil, for example, I'm going to show you our portfolio. We have a lot of partners, and that might be a problem because we have small projects. And sometimes we have a pulverization, a myriad of projects. It's too much. Right now, what we are doing is we are reviewing the portfolio to downsize the portfolio, to try to have bigger projects with less partners, because we are spread thin. We can't hire many people. People work a lot. People are stressed out. So if I could say, try for big projects with lesser partners, but key partners that are relevant in their area. And so, for example, I'll give you some of examples of how many projects you have. For example, governance. We have 31 projects in the governance area. So we work with public security, disaster risk management, human rights, and all of that ministries are partners. Ministry of Justice, of Human Rights, Regional Development, the National Administration School, the Judiciary Power, which is the National Council of Justice, the Presidency of Republic, some states like Mato Grosso, Distrito Federal, Rondônia. So in only one cluster, we have 31 projects with only $90 million delivery. So if you make the calculus, it's very small. So this for us has been a problem, and we are trying to solve and to get larger projects. Second example is the social development portfolio. We have 13 projects, all these partners, Ministry of Health, Education, a bank, which is Caixa Econômica Federal, all the South-South Cooperation, foundations, Nike, we work with Nike company, Minister of Citizenship, which is Culture and Sports. So this is like also 13 projects. Next one, our economic development portfolio, 16 projects. So we work with Ministry of Economy, with private sector. EPL is a state-owned private sector enterprise. Distrito Federal, Pará, it's another state. And last one, the environment portfolio. Sorry, we have also a new territorial development cluster where we have 12 projects for SDG localization. Here, the Petrobras project I mentioned and the Itaipu project are here. So this is a whole new set of projects. And finally, the environmental portfolio, where we have 23 projects. And here we have a star that is the Green Climate Fund pipeline. This is our bet this year because it's a $96 million project. So this will help us solve this issue of too many projects in our portfolio, because then we can step back from some small projects and try, and get a larger project that will make us more sustainable across time and will make us better manage our projects. So here we work with Ministry of Environment, the Agency of Waters in Brazil, Science, Technology, Agriculture, NGOs, Conservation International, so other NGOs in Brazil. So you can see how many partners are together. This is good in a way because we can create synergy among projects. We can create cross-fertilization. We can create knowledge among them. And we've been doing a lot of that. But this is very difficult to manage in terms of portfolio. So basically my message is that, reality makes my life harder. I don't know if you like Calvin, I love Calvin. So that's it. We have to, look at this with children's eyes, with fresh eyes. Of course, sometimes it won't make sense, but I think that the more you try, the more you go out there, you can build an interesting portfolio on government. So I believe that, to conclude, we need new narratives. We need diverse narratives. It's a new world. So we need a new UNDP. New skills are demanded. So we need fundraising, resource mobilization people, strategy, communication. We need branding. We need to get out there with this new world, social media, to modernize our speech, to modernize our history. And we need to be flexible, okay? We have to use, the UNDP is trying to get new different instruments to make partnerships that are more flexible, that are less bureaucratic. I don't know if you implemented here the new PPM, the new program instruments. So the headquarters is trying hardly to enter this new world with some more flexible instruments. And I'll be happy to talk about that. We are trying some of them in Brazil. We can have a webinar, another webinar, because these instruments have been really helpful for us to continue growing our portfolio. So thank you very much. I'm open for questions and suggestions also.
Okay, Juliana, that was really literally a very short and concise presentation, I think. Let's open the floor. I think it's interesting now. So it was not even 65%, 73% of the portfolio of UNDP Brazil is with the government. And so there, what Juliana is saying is, well, the government is our best partner. We're looking for this common ground. Partners, I think what's interesting is national level, but I hear as well like state or district level. I like this slide as well, like diversification. So never put your eggs in one basket. And I find it very impressive that you showed your portfolio that it's a list of like 25 different ministries. So it's not like one or two ministries interested in government financing. It really has become the default, I think. Over to for everybody to ask questions. Let's do a brainstorming, what we can learn from this and what are the things we need more clarity on. Jaco, the Chief of Policy, entered the room as well. I don't know, at a certain moment you can say a little bit the importance of government financing in this region. So who wants to raise the first question? James.
Yeah. Thank you very much. That was a really excellent presentation, giving us and inspiring us. I also had a look at your CPD going up to 2021. So lots of exciting stuff.
We are recording the webinar and the link will be shared with all the country offices.
Right. A couple of questions. I mean, number one, I've also seen the write-up on Anvisa, the work that you're doing, which is very inspiring. But within the write-ups, there's two parts linked to that, which I think is some of the things that country officers within our region are also facing. especially country officers, where a range of them are in middle income countries, which is this whole debate about NIM and country office support to NIM, which is which is something I think the Brazilian country office had, because you also have some national legislation that defines NIM as the modality of preference, or the default preference for government, especially since it's financed by common funds. So that's an issue that we have within this region. But I think what we would like to benefit from is how did you navigate that? Because the country office is trying to shift towards a CO support to NIM. Any tips to that, I think, is key. The second part is, I think, for Brazil, for some of our countries where there's a potential for South-South. So for this year, for example, you have 10 million that is going into South-South. So I think countries like Malaysia, Thailand, China, Indonesia, we have at least 4 countries which have a very active move by the government in terms of South-South. So I think trying to understand how did you hook the government into a conversation of UNDP's value proposition for South-South, I think is key, at least for a minimum of 4 of our countries. But yeah, let me just start off with that for your.
Okay, great. Can I answer, and then, or do you want to get around?
First you answer this, next time we do around.
Yes. The issue of support NIM is very interesting, because in Latin America we have a pure NIM country, which is Argentina, where the government does everything. In Brazil, it's not like that. So it's a middle between NIM and DIM, which is the CO support to NIM, in which the government has the initiative of the project, has, you know, everything the project has to do is government initiated. So for that, there is a whole logistical of systems. For example, Atlas, passwords, you know, government can get into Atlas and start a process. And then UNDP approves, then government continues. UNDP does some of the procurement issues, some of them we have long-term agreements with consulting firms. So it's really mixed. And that's very, very challenging. Because, for example, my unit is in charge of training the projects to do that. You know, training the projects to get access into Atlas, to the external access. There is a whole system that we built. And that's something that you might want to think about, how to operate this. It's with full NIM, CO support to NIM, how you're gonna do it. It's important, okay? Regarding South-South, sorry, let me go back to that. This legislation on that NIM is the preferable, it's the standard procedure in Brazil with government money, is very difficult for us. It's a straitjacket, you know, because sometimes the government only allows DIM projects for really complex projects that needs lots of interaction. So they consent into DIM projects. But the majority of projects is NIM, also because the government believes that NIM projects have more ownership, NIM projects have more empowerment of government. So the Brazilian government is also favorable to NIM. It's not something that we are pushing. On the contrary, now we are pushing for DIM because we have more freedom. You know, we have more capacity to deliver, to initiate things. Because why do you have so many projects? Because sometimes we do have the funds, but the government is stalled, it's freezed. Because sometimes, for example, when government changes, people are waiting for the marching orders. So a project team is not doing anything. Oh, we have to wait for the boss to say it's okay to continue. You see? So this, in the past year where we had a new government coming in, it was a challenge. The first months of the government, we were completely freezed. So this is an issue for sure. Regarding South-South, the previous governments, Lula government, Dilma Rousseff government, they were pro-South-South cooperation. They believed that Brazil should be a leader of soft power, should be a leader of developing countries. So we should support Africa, we should support Asia and all, especially Portuguese countries, by transferring social technology from Brazil, for example, Bolsa Família, cash transfer projects. So we managed to get these South-South projects because exactly we have a network of UNDPs in the whole world. So this value added of being present in 170 countries was the star for us to get the South-South portfolio. Because the other UNDPs support our operations, and these are these are operations with lots of countries of different kinds of operations to implement. So this is an interesting portfolio we have, which is about $10 million a year. And it benefits lots of countries in Africa and here in Middle East and in Asia.
Thank you. My name is Shakil Ahmed. I am at Coast Guard. Sorry, I came a bit late, so I might have missed some of the information you already might have shared. I was in Pakistan country office and was engaged in quite a bit of government cost sharing. So some of my questions are also based on the experience that I have. My first question is that what is the kind of key motivation for the government to provide their resources and to have partnership with UNDP? I'm saying this in case of Pakistan, for example, mostly the country, the government would come to us because at times their processes are quite rigid because it takes more time or there are issues of accountability and all those things. So when they engage with UNDP, the process are comparatively more quicker, and also the accountability lies with UNDP. Is this the same or is something different? I mean, in my experience, the technical expertise come at the second level. Like the first thing is that they want to have systems which are more efficient. Second is, and related to this, what would be the value added of UNDP in case of NIM projects? Because in NIM things they give you money and then you give the money back to them. I mean that is how the NIM works. So I was just wondering what would be the value added. In all the cases we had in Pakistan, all those projects were dim. Because to me, it does not make that much sense for them to kind of to have it through the NIM modality. And thirdly, and last question is that what is the kind of reputational issues that we should be aware of? Reputational issues, and just to give the example. So
Reputation.
So for example, in case of again Pakistan, we had around $17 million we got from the government for the SDG localization project. And I used to get even calls from the media, from journalists, because whenever there was to be discussion on the SDGs, the government would say that we have provided resources to UNDP and they're helping us to implement. So when it comes to the accountability on SDGs, they will also reach out to us and they would say, well, but you are part of the implementation thing with the government. So in a way, it was becoming quite sensitive at times, because I got a call from one of the senior journalists, and they were saying that Pakistan is not doing good on SDGs, and then you got money from. And I was trying to explain that the teeny resources that we got. I mean, of course, that's not for the implementation, but there is a reputation risk, because when they give you money, because they think that now since we give you money, then you are responsible for implementation as well. So how did you manage that in your case? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, mine is closely tied. So for me, I don't work in COSCA. I come from more of a programmatic project-ish background. My observation, and it's almost a question or comment, and others could feed in. I come from Barbados, from the other side. And so for me, when I see about the government cost sharing, I felt there was also a large element of culture and style of government. I think compared to Latin America, maybe Caribbean side, there's more, I don't want to call it, there's a different sense of authority, what authority means. From my experience moving to Asia, there's far more desire of governments to have control or to appear to have control. So there's some countries that will say, oh, I want DIM, but then they say it's DIM, but then I want to be able to sign off on this and this and this and this. You can't do this until we say yes. So effectively what you do is you strangle the DIM, and it's NIM-ish, except they're actually doing the transaction. But it all is bound up in the sense of what style of government you have. If it's a very top-down, if it's very authoritarian. And so from where I have sat and experienced in just implementing or coming up with co-finance, as we would say, we found that there's this element of control that's different. It's the relationship to power that's different. So my question is, if you have seen any examples in Latin America, the Caribbean, where that does exist, because NIM and DIM is all well and good, but how it's actually done is, to me, very strongly culturally influenced. So do you have any examples of places which were more, I don't use the word authoritarian, but wanted more control? And if so, were there any different arguments where it might not have the same level of cost sharing as Brazil, but maybe there was some increase in government cost sharing, and what kind of arguments were used to convince it?
Yeah, hi, thank you. So my question is a little bit more on the policy side, because I sit on the policy side here in the BRH. And I was wondering, could you elaborate a little bit more in how you've utilized the regional center in Latin America and Panama, and how they contribute or not, or could contribute to this kind of work? And I'm also asking because I think in our region we do have country officers are always strapped. They have so much to do, and their technical policy capacity, what they have, is also strapped. So how do you get out of kind of chicken and egg situation where you need, I'm assuming you need more of those capacities in order to be able to develop those programs, but yeah, well, you need that money in order to pay for the staff. So how do you do that?
Okay, let me answer this, and then we can. Okay. So the key motivation, the first one from Shaquille, right? You're right, technical capacity is important, but there are other motivations. First, again, Brazilian law, Brazilian AABC, which is the Brazilian Cooperation Agency, is a strict ruler of international cooperation in Brazil. So for example, 10 years from in 2005, a lot of people working in everyday tasks of government were hired through international cooperation, okay? So the Brazilian court said, no, civil service must be hired on a permanent basis by public exams. And this issue of international cooperation, hiring people to work 3 months and 3 months and 3 months, it's over. So our portfolio fell from $200 million to $50 million. Okay, this was a massive, massive shock for us. Why? Because they say international cooperation is not for hiring civil service. It's for bringing knowledge from international countries, from other countries, best practices, avant-garde knowledge to the government, and civil service must implement this new legislation or new policies, okay? So first, we cannot do everything. For example, information systems, it's a no-no. We cannot hire information systems. So it's pure knowledge from international consultants, you know, pilot projects, when you want to try new policies that will later be implemented from the government. So most of our work is really pilot projects that later will be developed into a national policy, okay? So this is one thing that is important. Usually new policy is tried. Second, there is a super budgetary issue, like, well, UNDP is some sort of bank of government in Brazil. Of this question you said, okay, what is the thing of putting into UNDP and getting back from UNDP? In Brazil, the budget, by the end of the year, if the ministry does not spend the money, it loses the money, okay? It goes back to Treasury, and then the ministry in the next year, they will have a lower budget because they say, you cannot spend this money, so give me back. So what governments do sometimes is to put the money in UNDP to save that money, so they can spend that money with longer time, 3 years, 4 years. So some sort of, you know, UNDP is really a bank for them. So they have more capacity to implement things, greater policies of greater budget over time, okay? So this is some value added also, because you can escape the political time. You can overcome the political process, and you can operate in a civil service process, because Brazil is a two-layer politics there. There is the political and there is the bureaucratical. And our partners are bureaucrats. They are not the politicians. These bureaucrats who remained many years in the government and that implemented projects before, and they know us and they know what they can do. So this is how they overcome politics and say, okay, let's build a policy, a serious policy on this issue. So they come to UNDP because they know they have their own time, that public policy has a different time. So they rely on us for that. The issue of reputation. For example, we had a major change in Brazil last year. We had 30 years of leaning left center government, and now we have an extreme right government who is super critical of UN, super critical of human rights, super critical of gender. We cannot say the word gender today in Brazil, you know. So we had also, we had to build a narrative, you know, and talk about, you know, oh, Constitution. This is a right that is in the Constitution, because what they cherish the, you know, the law. They cherish right-wing things. So we changed the narrative in order to be able to sit on the table and talk to them. This is a challenge for us because it goes to our core mandate. And some of my colleagues, they are really, you know, afraid of them, because you have to be very, very sensitive on the language you use and to mingle with them. So this has been, you know, related to the authoritarian issue, because this government is much more authoritarian than the governments before. The way, yes. So let me wrap up on that. So it's difficult for us to, but at the end, what people that really do the work are the people that remain, and they will remain for next governments. You know, one thing is to talk to the media and to talk on Twitter and to talk on the social networks. And other things is when you sit on the table and when you design a project that will remain for 10 years, for 20 years sometimes. So the way to deal with that is to go to the basics, I believe, which is our mandate, which are things that no one can be against, you know. So so basically the culture and style, I think it's about that. Regarding the regional center, we rely a lot on the regional center to bring specialists, sector specialists and program specialists on several policies, for example, citizen security, disaster risk management. So the Panama Regional Center have lots of expertise on disasters because of the Caribbean region. So we bring them. I used to work for the World Bank, and World Bank is really a matrix system. When we have a project, we can, bring all the international staff that is top level on that, and together with the local staff, they build projects that are super nice and that rely a lot of international expertise. So what we try to do with our regional center is some like that, is to do matrix projects that rely on the region's best specialists to bring this to Brazil. So we set up workshops, we set up meetings, we set up this kind of events so they can see the value added of having a specialist that is a freebie sometimes. It's, that we use core resources as a seed money to get, to formulate these propositions, to formulate these projects, and then we develop a government finance project. So we use seed missions, seed money to get these people from regional center in Brazil. You have anything more?
Thank you very much. Quite interesting presentation. My question is a little bit more to expand on what just Shakil mentioned, the whole idea of the reputation, but it's a little bit more to do with the reputation, more than reputation. If our portfolio, more than 70% is dependent on the resources of the government, how much are we giving in on our core values that we are supposed to be working there? For example, if we cannot at all mention the word of gender and others. So then the question is, how much are we ready to divert from what we are supposed to do there, just for the sake of continuing, because our existence there dependent on the resources that we get from the government. Mm-hmm. My second question is more practical in terms of how practically it works. Is the Brazil country office having a list of a menus of services that we have and we offer to the government? And because I see the number of projects that you alluded to, multiple projects in each of the areas that you work, is that because of the service lines you have to have so many projects? Or is it that the government faces a development issue and then you co-design something new, probably that is not part of your, that menu that I was referring to? Thank you.
Anybody else?
Hi, Juliana, just to say thank you. It's really nice to have you here, and thank you for also sharing. It's also nice to see always the passion that you have for working on these projects, especially in Latin America. So, maybe one thing is just, Patrick, as a follow-up, we can really explore also how to bring, because I think we had, when I was in India, the country director, we really talked about how do we bring the BRICS countries actually together to learn from government cost sharing, correct? Because again, where we were sitting in India and China and even South Africa, we were trying to learn how it's already being done by that state. Russia is already kind of matured into a donor, and Brazil was really doing this in a very innovative way. So actually there's something about that maturity of countries, for lack of a better term, correct? Governments, where they don't see this, and that's maybe the question. It's both maturity of staff, correct, to work differently under government cost sharing, which I found was the most difficult, correct? Because it is, you're basically working on development initiatives, and it doesn't matter where the funding is coming from. But you have to act differently now to the government, correct? You're an equal partner now. You're not saying, I'm bringing you money. So a little bit from staff, it is I wouldn't say, it's a little bit of you have to be thankful for what I offer, correct? Now it is, this is your money. We are development equals. And let's see if I can help you use this for the poor as best as you can, which is really a maturity completely different from how national staff need to react, both with the government, but even international staff as well, how they see government cost sharing, because we're really struggling to crack this government cost sharing thing, correct? The questions are all valid, but I think you can ask the same question for DFID funding, for USAID funding, for, for all the funding that's coming now, for accelerator labs from all, countries that probably we never saw as donors. So the funding mix is changing, but I don't think it's where the funding is coming from shouldn't matter, whether it's government or donors or private sector eventually. I mean, it all comes with caveats. The second part for me is just what was the most difficult thing for you to change the culture of the staff in the country office, correct? Because it's a new way of working that we're not traditionally used for. And then what do you find is still the most difficult problems in that implementation would be interesting maybe to reflect on. And then the government as well. When do the government start seeing us not as a donor, but as a development partner where, you know, they can use our processes and procedures to do payments quickly. They can hire on contracts that helps them deliver quicker. They can put us in a bank that helps them develop the funding over a longer period of time. Good, bad, or ugly. I mean, it is, you know, we do that with donor funding and other things as well. So the maturity from government, maturity from staff, what do you see is, lack of a better term, maturity, this kind of culture change that we need to have? What is the most learnings that you have seen from that?
Okay. So, your question regarding so many projects, and that's a great question because that's a question we are asking now. How did we come up with so many projects in this portfolio, you know? And what happened in Brazil is that we have projects that last 10 years. And the government keeps putting money in that project. So it keeps adding money and keeps reviewing and tweaking the project and to do their priorities. So we have projects with 10 years, we have projects of 2 years, we have projects, different projects of different secretaries within a ministry because every bureaucrat wants their own pet project. And we say a lot of yes, you know, oh, it's an interesting project, yeah, let's do it. We never say, oh, but your neighbor has also a project. Put the money in their projects, we can review and put an extra output and then we can implement, you know? So right now what Katina is doing, she's saying, wow, this is crazy. Let's rationalize and downsize and be only with what's really relevant, what's really important, what makes sense for us. You know, let's say no. We got into a point that we have to say no to the government. You know, so that's a good problem, I believe, because, you know, you're now in a comfortable situation, in a sustainability situation that you can actually say no to the government, okay? Regarding the maturity of staff, I totally agree with you. And picking back into the authoritarian question, I used to work for the World Bank, and the World Bank sometimes is extremely authoritarian. In Brazil, you know, the World Bank was authoritarian regarding social labor reform, what we call previdência. I forgot the word. Social security reform, thank you. Social security reform, which is the most difficult political reform you can do in Brazil. And sometimes the governors, because they wanted the money, they say, yes, we'll do social security reform, but they couldn't go through it. You know, so sometimes it's better to step down and not be in the place of a donor, because you won't build phony projects. You won't build false projects that won't fly, that won't be implemented, that won't be executed. So sometimes it's better to be in the level of the government and do incremental reforms and do incremental projects that they actually can do. Of course, it's more slow, it's less glamour, you know, of course, it's more work, but in terms of effectiveness of what we do is much better. You see, so when I got into the UNDP, I said, what, you depend on the government? For me, it was like, I was a world banker. I would sit I was 26 years old and I would sit next to a governor, a state governor, you know, and they would say, oh, okay, she's young, okay, but she's the World Bank. You know, that's an authoritarian place, in my opinion. So it does change the way you sit from the top down to a bottom up and to, you know, let's do business together. Let's make things together. So you do have to be more flexible, indeed, and you do need to know more array of instruments. Because what's another add value in Brazil is that our instruments allow government to work with universities, consultancies, NGOs. So these flexible arrangements that we can do in a project is also a value added. Because if they don't have a project, they will have to do cooperation separately with all the institutions the government wants to bring this knowledge. They might have an University of São Paulo, for example, which is top university in Brazil, and they want to get their health data information, for example, to the government. They have to build a separate agreement. With UNDP, we can do several of this into the project, which is much more easier for them to do, you see? So this is the main, when I go to the government to talk about instruments we have, they are mesmerized because, you know, it's a bunch of instruments that can facilitate, that can bring this policy inside much more easily than they would if they wouldn't have our what else? Is there, I answer your question? Okay.
Your presentation, so it takes a significant amount of resources from the government. I'm sure it's not a huge part of their budget, but still for UNDP's books, it's significant. So to what extent is there emphasis on results achieved, value for money, like vis-a-vis the other players there, or does UNDP not face much competition in the country? So for instance, if it's the only sort of player where you can use as a bank, as you were saying, so the emphasis then like implicitly is away from trying to achieve results because you know they'll always come to you, right? But if there is let's say 5 years down the road, like the government reforms and is able to use the resources over multiple years, what are the incentives then for the government to go to UN? Or if there's a new player in town, a large NGO, let's say, that does the same things more efficiently. So to what extent is the country office focused on achieving results, on value for money? And is there like evaluations, impact sort of assessments, and are those then sort of like scrutinized, publicized, and so on?
Okay. There is a fierce competition in Brazil. You know, in Brazil we have 24 resident agencies, which with large staff, and they're super competing with us. And turf fights happen all the time. Phone calls to residents, to representatives happen all the time. You know, what are you doing in my field? I'm education, you know, happens all the time. So yes, it's difficult. So for that reason, showing results is extremely important for us. We've been investing a lot on storytelling, on telling the stories of projects, of telling results. So if you go to our website, you're gonna see lots of exposures done about projects, lots of social media stories, lots of, you know, all kinds of material on our results, on, you know, measuring our benefits to Brazil. So this is important. We have videos on UNDP. We have all kinds of, you know, training materials. Training for us has been a value added because other agencies didn't develop that much their training. So it's very important to show that, especially when you have competition of UN agencies for government financing. No doubt about it.
two questions, a bit more answering. The reputational issue, I think from Hamidi, he says, do you become more dependent on the government if you accept their funding? So if you get a bigger part of the funding, and I think as well from Shakil, the question on NIM. So if the government gives government financing to the UNDP, and then the UNDP gives it back in advances. So a bit on these two questions, I think, if you can answer more. Any other last questions? Over to you, Juliana.
Juliana, one of my assumptions is, and you've worked for the World Bank, correct? What we're doing with government cost sharing is exactly what the World Bank does, correct? Because it's a loan that the government just have to repay. So it's actually their money that the World Bank brings. So this perception that the IFIs have 200 million that they give to the government, actually the government pays interest on that, correct? So for the relatively wealthy governments like Brazil or those, in assumption it's because they can't deliver on those projects, correct? Yeah, there is some that depends on loan money, but can you use that argument? It's exactly, in some ways, it's actually cheaper for the government because we might bring in some of our own grant funding, correct, to a little bit substitute maybe a PMU or something like that. Is it, or I mean?
Yes, you're right. You're right. The World Bank lends money. But what happens in Brazil is that the fiscal situation sometimes make government need this advancement of money in order to roll out the debt they have. So cheaper money from the bank is really relieving the fiscal situation of states, for example. So it's not that similar because, you know, for them, they need to deposit the money in World Bank. So for them, it's some sort of, it's good for them to roll out policy and not losing this money for their own government, which is the Treasury Ministry, okay? That by the end of the year, we'll go get back the money. Is that your question?
You explained it well.
Okay.
It's a similar concept, but it's not quite the same in terms of how they can use their own money, correct? For development, which is basically the same concept.
Yes, and also the flexibility of our instruments vis-a-vis the government bureaucracy. Because in Brazil, they build a lot of firewalls against corruption. So it's very difficult actually to spend money in the government, you know, because the processes, they are so difficult to go through that it's even difficult to spend money in the government.
In terms of the service offer that we go back to the government, we might call it service lines or service offer. How does that get constructed when you're in a MIC and there's all of these other limitations, and we don't want to get bogged down by one business model, which you guys have navigated. But just trying to understand, when you engage with the government, and that's the benefit that we want our colleagues to benefit from, how do you construct that and moving forward? Because you have had an evolution in Brazil, and we are very much at a starting phase, maturity model or not. But yeah, thoughts on how did you design that? What are the key service offers that you're putting forward to the government?
Yes, when they design a project, they know more or less what they want. They want consultants. They want to partnership with some universities. They want an NGO to help the government to implement a project locally because they have more capillarity in Brazilian territory. So the government pretty much knows what they want. And on the other side, we have our instruments. So we have long-term agreement with several worldwide consulting firms that we can hire to them. So if they want to do a management reform, we can hire some top-notch consultancies to provide this service. We also can hire individual consultants. We also can partner with these universities. So it's more or less matching what they need to what we can offer. And then we draw the project. And then we draw the matrix and then the budget. So it's more or less like we present the instruments, what they can do, and then they say, oh, we need that, in many conversations, in many interactions. Okay. So regarding reputation, I'm not sure I understand, but let me see if I can try to. we had some projects that the new Brazilian government didn't like for several reasons. For example, we have a volunteerism project that stimulates the population to do voluntary work, okay? This project before was more related to human rights, social issues, and now we tweak the project so it becomes more like country service project, okay? So it's not that we are risking our reputation by saying against core values of UN, but we change the project so it's more on what the government is interested. You see? So we are not damaging our image or by doing that. It's just a change of narrative. We change the name of the project, this kind of thing.
I think what Hamidi means, UNDP Afghanistan, for example, currently they have $0 from the government.
Mm-hmm.
So if the government gives the UNDP, let's say $100 million to do a project on decentralization or safety in certain provinces, will the UNDP lose its independence? Mm-hmm. So if we take money from the government, do we need to do what the government does, or how do you in Brazil kind of like maintain the ethical compass of the UN mm-hmm. and not getting influenced by where we get the money from?
Oh,
that's more the question now.
Yeah.
And then the question from Shakil, like how does it work with NIM, getting the money from the government and then giving it back to the government?
Mm-hmm. In Brazil, we don't do everything the government wants. So there are things that we don't do and we say no. Okay, so baseline, that's it. Other things we can negotiate in terms of how to build that in a more UN-ish way, you see? But definitely there are policies that we won't do, that we won't support. And it's part of saying no to that in a polite and kind way is part of the job. So you're right. That's why it's so important to have so many projects, I suppose, is to, you know, manage risk and deal with the risk of actually having to say no to some of the projects that the government wants to do. So yes, you have to start on the safe side on issues that are aligned with our mandate, our core values, our ethics, and then you might, you know, say no to other things. That would be my take. And regarding the NIM, I think it's what I said, you know, the money goes into UNDP, at least in Brazil, because some of the government rules are too cumbersome to be implemented. So it's easier to get the money to UNDP and by UNDP procedures, by UNDP rules and regulations that are less cumbersome than government. So it's easier to implement a project by UNDP rules than implement the same thing by government rules. Is that it? Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So no more questions. I think we come to the end. I think that it was really, really interesting. I think this fresh perspective from the other side of the ocean of the world. I think, but I think we recording it. We're making a question and answer. We had I think 13 very good questions. Yeah, what I take from it, I think Amidi's question, like as long as we co-design a project, as long as we as the UNDP have the ethical compass right, we shouldn't do what the government mandates us to do. We should do what makes the world a better place, I think. And there, what I get from the UNDP Brazil as well, it really doesn't matter if Sweden pays you the money or it is the government of Bangladesh. If the project is jointly co-designed well, and it has the mandate of the UNDP what we need to do, then we can implement the project. And so we in this region, we need to kind of like take that mindset. I think we need funding for good initiatives. And it doesn't matter where the funding comes from. What I liked as well, that it is, I didn't hear the word procurement in this presentation often. It's clear, we don't shuffle boxes around the planet. Yeah, UNOPS, they do procurement no matter what they do. We always, what I heard from Juliana, is like linking the policy to pilots, then doing projects in the hope or the desire that this becomes national policy and then the government takes it over. And so there should be always a policy element. What I liked as well, the bit related to the question of honey, the GPN experts design government financing projects. And so here as well, I think there we need GPN on board. We cannot have that, yeah, if a country of us, like the Philippines, has a good relationship with the government, and off we go. And we need a whole policy network to be aware that we can also design government financing projects. We cannot only design projects for Japan or Sweden or the EU, we can also design projects for government financing. So there is this issue in UNDP Brazil, so why so many projects? I say in Asia Pacific, that's not the issue yet. So let's not kind of like start bugging down on that one. We have too little projects. And I think you come, as you have a lot of projects, you get in the situation that you can say no, and that you can kind of like prune out your portfolio and get a bit more focused. We still need to have growth in this area, I think. What we discussed in the beginning a bit, that's just on the instruments. I say, no, you don't need to tell a lot about the instruments because we have the same, but I think, yeah, what I realized in this presentation as well, governments have bigger bureaucrats than we are. And so we need to be a bit proud of ourselves, get confidence, because we are often faster, cheaper, and more transparent. Yeah, we are less cumbersome, as Juliana said. And that's an offer we can give to the government. Competition, I think as well, so she says there's a fierce competition in Brazil, because the model, of course, has been living there for the last 20 years. When I worked in Honduras 20 years ago, we did government financing. The good news is in Asia Pacific, there is no turf battle because there is no turf. So I think we as UNDP should get into the market and be the first to really be a significant player on government financing, and we are on that road. And what I heard as well, that, yeah, link it always with very strong communication and branding. I mean, marketing should be part of it. We need to be proud what we are, and we need to be selling what we can offer. This menu services, well, I mean, on your question, I think, yeah, it is in our mandate. And so either the 5 Ps or the 6 signatory solutions, that's what we're offering to the government. And so we don't do like pure education projects or pure health projects, but everything that fits in our 6 signatory solutions or the 3 pillars of our strategic plan or the 5 Ps, that's a bit of what we're offering. The good news here as well, I think in comparison to Juliana, I didn't hear her talk about track at all. Not track 1, not track 2, not track 3. Because it doesn't exist. And so if we move into the middle income countries, track becomes insignificant. I think probably it's like $500,000 or something.
Yeah, it's very little.
Yeah? So in this region, we still have, how much track do we have? Like $20–30 million. We should use this as seed money to kind of like diversify our portfolio. And as Juliana says, not having all the eggs in little baskets. In our region, the eggs are in the bilateral basket and in the vertical basket. So we need to get more baskets, and we have track to invest in that, I think. So that sums it up for today. I think another webinar, very, very interesting, very different than the last one we did. So thanks so much, Juliana. We're going to have lunch, so everybody who wants to join us in the cafeteria, let's have lunch and discuss more what's happening in Brazil. Thank you so much.
Thank you.